The door didn't close all the way. It stopped just short of the latch, like it was listening. I remember staring at that thin line of light while the paper sat between us on the desk. No letterhead, no signature yet, just my name typed cleanly at the top, like it still belonged to me. My manager didn't look up. He kept his fingers folded, calm, patient, waiting. I could hear my own breathing and the faint hum of the building settling for the night. If I stood up, if I said one sentence out loud, everything I had built in that place would end right there. I reached for the pen before he had to ask. My hand shook once. Then I signed. Before that night, my life had a shape I trusted. Not exciting, not impressive, but steady. I'd been with the company long enough that my badge opened doors without hesitation. People nodded when I passed. New hires learned my name early because someone told them quietly, "He knows how things really work." I wasn't management, but I wasn't replaceable either. Or so I believed. I came from a house where work was treated like a contract with reality. You show up. You keep your head down. You don't confuse fairness with survival. My father used to leave before sunrise and come back smelling like oil and dust, shoulders slumped, but proud of it. He never talked about dreams. He talked about keeping the lights on. That stayed with me longer than any advice. So I built my life carefully. A modest home with a mortgage that didn't scare me. A marriage that had learned how to be quiet without being cold. 2 kids who assumed stability was permanent, the way children do. We didn't chase upgrades. We planned. We saved. I told myself that was wisdom, not fear. At work, I became useful in ways that didn't draw attention. I fixed things before they became visible problems. I took on tasks that didn't come with credit, but prevented embarrassment for people above me. I learned when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. Over time, that restraint turned into trust, or maybe dependence. It's hard to tell the difference once you're inside it. There were signs, of course, subtle ones. A shift in tone during meetings, decisions announced after they were already made, people disappearing from desks overnight, their names spoken carefully for a week, and then not at all. Restructuring, they called it. Efficiency, necessary corrections, words that sound clean until they land on someone you know. I noticed my manager changed too. He stopped asking for my input and started informing me of conclusions. Our conversations shortened. His door stayed closed more often. When it did open, it felt rehearsed, like he'd already practiced how much honesty to allow. At home, I didn't talk about it. Not really. I'd say things were busy, that there were changes coming. My partner listened the way someone does when they sense weight, but don't know its shape yet. We had responsibilities, tuition timelines, a car that wouldn't last forever, parents who were starting to need help without saying so. I told myself this was just another phase, that staying calm, staying agreeable, was how you get through these moments. I believed that loyalty, even quiet loyalty, was noticed, that there was an unspoken balance sheet somewhere, keeping track. I didn't yet understand how quickly those numbers can be rewritten. It started with a meeting that wasn't on my calendar. An email came through late in the afternoon, flagged urgent, asking me to stop by before I left. No subject line, just a room number and a time that gave me exactly 10 minutes to prepare and no space to refuse. I remember standing up from my desk and noticing how ordinary everything looked. The same screens glowing, the same half-empty mugs, people laughing too loudly near the elevators, already halfway out of the day. Inside the room, there were 2 chairs on my side of the table, only one on theirs. My manager was there, and someone from compliance I'd only seen in passing. She smiled the way people do when they've decided not to be remembered. They didn't waste time. There had been an internal review, an irregularity, a discrepancy connected to a project I'd overseen months earlier. They said my name calmly, repeatedly, as if saying it enough times would make it fit the accusation. I asked what exactly they were talking about. They slid a folder toward me, already open, already marked. I knew the project, I knew the numbers. I also knew where the shortcut had been taken. Not by me, but by someone higher up. Someone whose instructions had been given verbally, carefully, without witnesses. At the time, I'd flagged the risk quietly. I'd been told to let it go, that it was handled. Now it was being unhandled. They didn't accuse me outright. That was the clever part. They spoke in conditionals. If this went further, if regulators asked questions, if intent was assumed rather than error, every sentence ended with an invisible cliff. Then they offered clarity. The company wanted to resolve the matter internally. No investigation, no escalation. But responsibility needed to be acknowledged. A formal statement, a signed document confirming procedural failure on my part. It would go in my file. There would be no public action, no termination, just a correction. A sacrifice small enough to contain the damage. I asked what would happen if I didn't sign. The compliance officer answered that one. Her voice didn't change. She explained the process as if she were describing weather. External review, suspension during inquiry, legal exposure, outcomes that would depend on interpretation, on momentum, on how cooperative I appeared. My manager finally looked at me then, not apologetic, just tired. He said, "You've always been a team player. This is how we protect what matters." I thought of the meetings I'd stayed late for, the weekends I'd answered emails without being asked, the times I'd swallowed objections because pushing back would slow things down. All the quiet ways I'd helped this place function. I realized, in that moment, that those same qualities made me ideal for this. They gave me the document and left the room so I could take my time. The door didn't close all the way. I sat there with the paper and felt something settle. Not panic, not anger, something heavier, a calculation. If I refused, I'd be right, but I'd be exposed. If I accepted, I'd be wrong, officially, but intact. Job, income, insurance. The fragile architecture of my life would stay standing. When they came back, I already knew what I was going to do. I just hadn't yet admitted what it would cost me later. After that meeting, nothing changed on the surface. That was the strangest part. My access still worked. My name was still on the org chart. People still came to me with questions, problems, small emergencies. The machine kept moving and so did I. But there was a new drag to everything. Like I was walking with something lodged under my skin. The document went into effect quietly. No announcement, no follow-up meeting, just a confirmation email from compliance thanking me for my cooperation. The word cooperation sat there, bolded by implication. I deleted the message but kept checking my trash folder for days, like it might crawl back out. My manager treated me with a careful neutrality after that, polite, professional. He stopped looping me into conversations that brushed too close to risk. I was still useful, but only in contained ways. I could feel the perimeter shrink. Not enough to justify a complaint. Just enough to remind me where I stood. At home, the weight started leaking out in pieces. I became quieter at dinner, less patient over small things. I woke up earlier than I needed to, heart already racing, replaying sentences from that room. My partner noticed, of course, asked if something was wrong. I said work was complicated, that it would pass. I said it with enough confidence that it sounded like reassurance, not avoidance. But I started doing math in my head all the time. Tuition years, retirement contributions, how long we could last if my income disappeared suddenly. I checked our insurance details more than once, just to remind myself it was still active, still mine. At work, I saw how the story was being shaped without me. A revised process memo circulated, outlining new controls on the exact area where the issue had occurred. My name wasn't mentioned, but the implication was clear. A quiet correction attributed to oversight. My oversight. I wanted to say something, to point out the missing pieces, the verbal instructions, the pressure to move fast. But every time I imagined opening my mouth, I also imagined the consequences unspooling behind it. Emails being forwarded, meetings being scheduled, my cooperation reclassified as resistance, so I stayed silent. That silence started to change how people looked at me, or maybe how I looked at myself. I noticed younger employees watching closely, measuring what happened to someone like me. I caught fragments of conversations that stopped when I approached. Not gossip, caution. The worst moments were the small ones. When someone thanked me for taking responsibility. When a senior leader nodded at me in passing, as if I'd done something noble, as if I'd chosen this for the good of everyone else. Each time, something tightened in my chest. Not because they were wrong, but because they were right in the way that mattered most to them. I told myself this was temporary, that things would rebalance, that my record of steady work would eventually outweigh one contained failure. I kept showing up early. I kept fixing problems. I kept my head down. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the day had finally stopped demanding things from me, I felt the truth more clearly. I hadn't just accepted an injustice. I had agreed to carry it. The moment came on a Tuesday that should have been forgettable. There was a review meeting scheduled with senior leadership. Routine, quarterly, nothing dramatic on paper. I was asked to attend for continuity. That phrase again. Continuity. As if my presence was a kind of adhesive. Halfway through the meeting, a slide went up on the screen. A summary of lessons learned from the incident months earlier. My incident. My name wasn't on the slide, but everyone in that room knew exactly whose shadow it was casting. A vice president I'd barely spoken to in my career leaned back in his chair and said, almost casually, "This is a good example of accountability done right." The room murmured in agreement. Something in me shifted then. Not loudly, not visibly, just a quiet, internal click, like a latch finally catching. They weren't protecting me. They weren't even protecting the company anymore. They were using me. My acceptance had become a story they could point to. Proof that the system worked, that mistakes were owned, that integrity lived somewhere in the process. I felt heat rise in my face. My hands went cold. For a brief, dangerous second, I imagined standing up, saying one sentence, naming the instruction that had been given off the record, watching the room change shape as attention snapped toward me. I imagined the relief of no longer holding this alone. And then I imagined the fallout. The meeting adjourned with polite efficiency. Chairs scraped, laptops closed. People stood and chatted about calendars and flights. As they filed out, the vice president caught my eye and gave me a firm nod. Approval. Gratitude, even. My manager lingered behind. He put a hand on my shoulder. Not heavy, not friendly, just deliberate. "You did the right thing," he said. "Not everyone could." That was it. That was the line, the final seal. I nodded back. I even managed a small smile, the kind you learn to produce when the cost of honesty is too high. When I got back to my desk, I opened my email and drafted a message I'd been considering for weeks, a formal acknowledgement of the updated process, a reaffirmation of my commitment, words that aligned me fully with the version of events they'd decided on. I read it once, twice, then I hit send. As the confirmation popped up, I felt a hollow settle in my chest. Not regret exactly, but recognition. In choosing to keep everything, I had given something away. And there was no appeal process for that. Nothing dramatic followed. No punishment. No reward. Just continuity, which was the whole point. I kept the job. The paycheck arrived on time. Insurance stayed active. The routines at home remained intact. Dinners, school schedules, weekend errands. The life I was protecting stayed upright, balanced carefully on the decision I'd made. From the outside, it looked like proof that I'd handled things the right way. Inside, the cost kept accruing. I changed how I worked. I stopped trusting tone and relied only on records. I followed instructions exactly, even when I knew they were flawed. Especially then. I became harder to corner, harder to blame, less valuable in the way that once mattered, safer, smaller. No one objected. The incident disappeared from conversation. New initiatives replaced it. New people filled rooms where my silence had once mattered. My name remained clean enough to keep moving, but it no longer opened doors the same way. It didn't need to. I wasn't trying to open anything anymore. At home, I never told the full story. I said enough to explain my mood, never enough to invite judgment. There are some decisions that don't want witnesses. They just want to be lived with. Sometimes I think about the version of myself who didn't sign, not with regret, with curiosity. I wonder how much I would have lost. I wonder what would have remained. What I know is this: injustice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's procedural. Sometimes it thanks you for your cooperation. Sometimes it lets you keep everything visible while quietly removing something internal you don't realize you'll miss until later. I accepted it so I wouldn't lose everything. I kept my life. I just learned what it was built on.